I was about to be accused of stealing inside a billionaire's mansion. Until a faint little meow came from my bag and turned the whole night upside down. My name is Casey, and I worked in the home of a powerful man in Scarsdale, New York, the kind of man who treats trust like a luxury item. Then, out of nowhere, things started disappearing, and he decided I was the problem. You think you know who the villain is in this story? I thought I did too. But what I was carrying in that bag wasn't jewelry, wasn't cash. And it involved someone he had erased from his life like they were nothing. Before I tell you this secret, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? I pushed open the iron gate of that mansion in Scarsdale, and the gravel crunched under my sneakers like even the ground was telling me, stay in your place. A light rain made everything smell like wet grass and cold stone. I was 22 with a brand new badge hanging from my neck, but it felt like I was walking into a museum that didn't want visitors. When the front door opened, the air that came out was clean in a way that felt scrubbed with discipline. He appeared at the top of the staircase without hurrying gray robe, the posture of a man who commands his own echo. Graham Wexler, 65, one of those billionaires you see in magazines and imagine laughing on a yacht. Up close, there was no sparkle. Just tired eyes calculating everything. My backpack, my hands, the way I stood still. He greeted me by my last name, like I was already an item on his checklist, and said that in his house everything works because everyone knows their price. On the first day, I understood how big that house was. And how empty. The hallways were lined with expensive paintings and zero signs of life. No recent photos, no kids' noise, no smell of real food. Just the sound of my footsteps and a ticking clock that felt like it was measuring me. He talked about his 2 divorces the way someone talks about bad contracts, and dropped a sentence that stuck to my skin. Trust is like security. You pay to have it. He tried to be kind in his own way. Offered me an expensive jacket because I was soaked, asked if I wanted an advance on my bonus, even suggested I could use one of the cars in the garage whenever I needed to. I thanked him and turned everything down. One thing at a time, with a short smile. His expression didn't change, but I saw the hairline crack. He wasn't too used to hearing no without an apology attached. I squeezed the strap of my backpack hard, because in that instant I knew. To him, refusing a gift felt like an offense. That night, as I closed up the spotless kitchen and turned off the lights, I could feel his eyes on my back even when he wasn't there. It wasn't fear hanging in the air. It was calculation. And from the way he looked at everything like it could be bought, I figured out one thing. If anything at all went out of place, he'd go hunting for someone to blame. I just didn't imagine the first thing would be small, silent, and would land exactly in my lap. At first, the things were so small, I almost laughed to myself. A pack of gauze I'd seen on the shelf, and the next day it just wasn't there. A bottle of antiseptic that was used up too fast, according to the housekeeper. Old towels vanishing from the basket before heading to the laundry. Stuff that, in any normal house, would just mean, oh, someone used it. But in Graham Wexler's house, nothing disappeared. Everything had a place, an invisible inventory tag, and an owner who seemed to hear it when even the silence changed. I started paying attention to the way he walked through doorways. He didn't enter a room, he inspected a room. Hands behind his back, chin slightly raised, eyes sweeping the counters, the trash, the cabinets. Sometimes he would stop in front of the pantry and stare at a can of soup like it might confess. I pretended not to notice, but my body was already reacting on autopilot, straightening things that weren't even crooked just so he wouldn't have an excuse. One afternoon, he called me into his office. No yelling, no drama. Worse than that, it was too calm. He stayed seated, low lighting, a glass of water untouched, like the entire scene had been staged to make me uncomfortable. You've been efficient, he said, and I could already feel the but coming. He slid a piece of paper across the desk with a short list: towels, food, medication. Without accusing me directly, he dropped the line like bait. I don't tolerate disorganization. Even less, dishonesty. I fought the impulse to rush into a defense. I just took a short breath and told him I followed the routines, that I didn't take anything from the house, that if something had gone missing, I wanted to understand it too. He didn't raise his voice, but he raised one eyebrow, like my answer was too polite to be true. His pen tapped the desk, twice tap, tap, and it sounded like a judge closing a case before hearing the defense. In the days that followed, the house changed. Not on the outside, but inside its atmosphere. Drawers started showing up locked. The housekeeper began counting towels like they were diamonds. Even the fridge got a new order of shelves, and I could feel it wasn't about organization. It was about control. And I started to notice something else. Mr. Wexler wasn't just suspicious of me. He seemed to need to be suspicious of someone, as if suspicion was the only thing that made him feel alive. That's when I saw the first real clue. One morning, leaving early, I noticed a new camera pointed at the service area. Small, discreet, aimed exactly down the hallway. I used to grab cleaning supplies. My jaw clenched on its own. In that second, it was obvious. He'd already decided the problem had a name. And the name was mine. I started living like every step left a footprint. It wasn't paranoia, that was the atmosphere in that house. Mr. Wexler didn't ask, "How was your day?" anymore. He asked, "What time did you leave the kitchen?" And the fake casual way he'd say it was almost insulting. He made a point of showing up by chance wherever I was, appearing in the hallway when I came back from the laundry, walking into the pantry while I was closing cabinets, standing near the trash cans. Like he suddenly had a genuine interest in black bags. One night I went downstairs to put away the groceries and found the pantry different. Nothing technically wrong, but things were marked, a tiny piece of tape on a bag of rice. A pill bottle lined up with ridiculous precision. I touched the top of one bottle and saw a faint dusting of baby powder, so light you'd miss it if you weren't looking. I'd seen this in movies, that trick people use to tell if someone has been messing with their stuff. I yanked my finger back instantly, feeling this hot wave of anger rise, but I held my breath and kept working like nothing had happened. The next day, the housekeeper called me into the service area with that fake smile people use when they pretend they read helping. She spoke low, like the walls had ears. "He doesn't like surprises," she said. I answered that I didn't either. She pressed her lips together and delivered the blow. "Some people come here thinking it's an opportunity, and leave thinking it's a prison." The sentence just hung there, heavy, and I got it. She wasn't on my side. She was on the side of her paycheck, on the side of her fear. The craziest part was I couldn't even prove my innocence because I didn't know what was really happening. Yes, I noticed when something was missing. I saw empty boxes, towels gone earlier than usual. But I also saw another pattern nobody seemed to notice. Mr. Wexler threw away perfectly useful things. Medicine about to expire, trash, a towel with a stain, trash, an untouched full dinner, trash. It was like wasting things was his way of telling the world nothing in his house was truly needed. One afternoon I walked by his office door and heard him on the phone. I didn't catch the whole conversation, but one line came through clear and cold. "I don't want a scandal. I want certainty, silence. Then, once I have certainty, I'll handle it my way." I froze for a second in the hallway, holding a laundry basket, and felt my fingers go stiff around the handle. That wasn't the tone of "I'll fire her." That sounded like planned humiliation. Then came the part that changed everything. He announced a business trip to Boston, gone for 2 days. The entire house seemed to relax a little, like the predator had stepped out of the cage. I finally felt air getting back into my lungs. But that same night, the sky opened up. Lightning cutting past the windows, wind beating the trees, the power flickering like the mansion was just another ordinary house. I looked outside and thought, okay, at least he won't be back tonight. What I didn't know yet was that, in this story, the worst always shows up right when you think you've earned a break. I was in the kitchen trying to get the basics done. Under the dim emergency lights, that weak glow that makes everything look like a crime scene. Outside, the storm was pounding the windows like it wanted in. The wind scraped the trees against the glass, and every clap of thunder came with that short delay, like the world counting 1, 2, now. I checked the clock and pictured the highway to Boston closing down, flights getting canceled, all of it. In my mind, Mr. Wexler was far away. It was the first night in weeks I could work without feeling eyes weighing on my back. That's when I heard the front gate. Not just any sound, the specific clang of iron opening and closing, followed by firm footsteps in the hall. I froze with a pan in my hand and listened. It wasn't the housekeeper. It wasn't security. It was him. His rhythm. I set the pan down carefully so it wouldn't make noise, and my throat tightened, because his return just didn't make sense. When he walked into the kitchen, he was soaked from shoulders to cuffs, gray hair plastered to his forehead. He didn't look like a man beaten by the rain. He looked like a man angry at being inconvenienced. He stared at me like I'd personally ordered the storm. "Everything got canceled," he said, then scanned the room quickly, already looking for something out of place. I just answered, "Yes, sir," and he took 2 slow steps, moving like he owned every inch of space. I tried to act normal, grabbed a cloth, pretended to wipe a counter that was already clean. But I knew he hadn't just come back because of the weather. The canceled trip was an excuse. His mind was locked on one thing. I could see it in how his eyes slid over drawers, the pantry door, the medicine cabinet. He ran his hand along the counter, saw an open pack of cookies, and paused for half a second. Half a second was all he needed to write an entire story in his head. And then the thing happened I'd been trying to avoid. I had to leave. It wasn't a task, it wasn't routine. It was something I'd been putting off for days, waiting for a safe window. I went to the service area and grabbed my bag. It was heavier than usual, and I knew that was a slow motion mistake. I tried to adjust the strap like it was no big deal and walked toward the side door as if it was just end of shift. But right as I reached the doorway, I heard his voice behind me. "What are you carrying there?" The question sounded almost polite, too calm, and that scared me more than any shout. I turned slowly and he was already in the hallway, blocking the way like the mansion was his courtroom, and he was judge and security all at once. The weak light cast deep shadows across his face, and his eyes looked almost pleased to finally catch me in a perfect scene. I tried to explain. Started with, "I can," and my voice died in the worst way possible. He took a step, held out his hand, and said quietly, "Open it." Just that one word, no discussion. I hugged the bag closer to my body on instinct and realized instantly how bad that looked like guilt. He tilted his head like he'd already reached his conclusion. And then out of nowhere, a small living sound came from inside. A weak meow, short, strained, and Mr. Wexler's face changed like someone had ripped a curtain off his eyes. I stood there with a bag pressed to my chest, staring at him like any word out of my mouth could make things worse. The meow came again, even weaker, and I saw him hesitate for a fraction of a second, as if reality had just slapped him. He pointed at the counter. "Put it here." His voice was low, firm, leaving no room for please. I did what he said. The strap scraped across the wood, and when I unzipped the bag, the smell of damp fabric and old medicine rushed out. The first thing that appeared was a small cat, far too skinny, with one paw wrapped in a makeshift bandage. He curled into himself, trying to disappear into the fabric, letting out that broken little cry that sounds like a plea for help. Mr. Wexler actually stepped back, almost involuntarily, like he didn't know what to do with his hands. I eased the cat out, and he trembled all over but didn't try to scratch me. My fingers went rigid when I saw the dried blood on the bandage. "I'm not stealing," I blurted before he could finish writing his version of the story. Then came the rest. Old towels folded up, stained in ways that exposed a makeshift clinic. A bag with food containers, not fancy, not gourmet, just enough to keep someone from going hungry. And between the cloths, dented bottles of medicine I'd seen headed for the trash days before. The ones the housekeeper set aside as disposed because Mr. Wexler wanted everything replaced with something newer. He picked up one of the bottles, rolled it in his hand, and looked at me like I'd smuggled poison into his house. My jaw locked. I knew exactly what that scene looked like, and I knew he'd use it against me. He started pulling things out one by one, laying them on the counter like pieces of evidence. That's when an old photograph slipped out of a crumpled envelope. It hit the counter face down, but he was faster than me, flipped it over and stared. His face shifted again, not from anger this time, but from impact. In the picture, he was younger, genuinely smiling, arm around an older man, both of them with dirt on their hands and gardening caps on. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice rough, like that image had broken into the house without permission. I swallowed hard and finally said the truth I'd been avoiding for months. "This isn't about you. It's about him." I pointed at the older man in the photo. His name is Ray Collins. He used to work here. Mr. Wexler pinched the photo between his fingers so tightly it bent, like he could erase the past by crushing paper. If you've ever been accused of something while nobody wants to hear your side, hit subscribe. Because what came next is the kind of thing you only believe if you see it. He glared at me and snapped, "What are you using this for? To blackmail me?" I shook my head immediately, almost offended, and my voice came out cracked in a way I hated. "I'm using it to keep someone alive." I shifted the cat in my arms, showing the injured paw. "I'm taking this to a place you don't even know exists." He went still for a second, then glanced down the hallway like the entire house had shrunk around him. Finally, he spoke again, short and sharp, giving an order, not a request. "Take me to him. Now." He grabbed his coat from the hook, opened the door, and the storm came roaring in. Right then, I understood whatever came next was going to be the most dangerous step of all. We slipped out the side door and the rain hit us like it had a grudge. Mr. Wexler walked ahead of me, moving way too fast for a man his age. Ignoring puddles, ignoring the wind, like the whole world was supposed to clear a path. I held a cat against my chest under my coat, so he wouldn't get soaked, and hurried to keep up. When I unlocked my old car in the back lot, Wexler didn't even hesitate. He got into the passenger seat like he owned it too. And in that moment, he kind of did. The engine rattled to life and the wipers beat across the windshield in a nervous rhythm. He stared straight ahead, jaw tight, and I could feel him still trying to bend this scene into a version where he wasn't wrong. "Who is he?" he asked without looking at me. I dug my fingers into the steering wheel and gave the simplest answer. "Ray Collins, the gardener you let go." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "I don't coldly let anyone go. I pay what I owe and move on." I bit the inside of my cheek and kept driving because arguing parked in the driveway wouldn't change a thing. "You paid what you owed on paper," I said, "but you took away the only stable thing he had." He finally turned toward me and his eyes were knives. "Are you judging me?" I shook my head quickly. "I'm telling you what I saw." And then I said my own name out loud, because I needed to remind myself I existed in this. "My name is Casey. I started working for you 6 months ago. And by the second week I could tell Ray had nowhere else to go." The rain thickened and the road turned black and glossy with reflections. I told him the story without dressing it up. How I'd run into Ray near a bus stop, hunched over, coughing, wearing clothes too thin for that kind of cold. How he'd tried to pretend he was fine when he recognized me, like he was still an employee and I belonged to the house. I saw the shame in the way he hid his hands. "He's sick," I said, my voice cracking on the last word. "He's living in a room that looks like it might collapse. And he barely has money for his medicine." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Wexler's fingers press into his knee, a tiny gesture, loaded with something he didn't want to name. "So you've been taking things from my house." It came out as an accusation, but the word stealing didn't have the same force anymore. I nodded, no theatrics. "Things that were headed for the trash. Towels you called unusable. Food that was left untouched. Medication you tossed because you bought something newer and fancier." I took a short breath and added, "And the cat." I found him hurt near the storage shed. I wasn't going to let him die alone. If you're listening and thinking, why didn't she just ask for help? Hit subscribe, because I did. I asked. The answer was always the same. A polite smile and a door closing. I turned down a narrow street, away from the pretty lights, and the GPS led us to a cluster of low buildings with peeling paint and broken mailboxes. Mr. Wexler stared out the window like he'd only ever seen poverty in reports, not in person. I parked, killed the engine, and the sudden silence felt heavy. "This is it," I said. He hesitated for half a second before getting out, like his body didn't quite believe it should step onto that concrete. As we climbed the stairs, listening to water dripping somewhere, I realized he was about to face something no amount of money would let him unsee. The hallway smelled like mold and cheap disinfectant, and the ceiling light flickered like it was tired too. I went up the stairs with the cat tucked into my coat, feeling Mr. Wexler behind me, not speaking, just listening to the building breathe. At door 3B, I paused for a second, because I knew once we crossed that threshold, there'd be no going back to the clean world of the mansion. I knocked twice, short. From inside came the slow shuffle of slippers and a deep cough that sounded like it scraped the walls on the way out. The door opened just a crack, and one exhausted eye appeared first, suspicious. "Casey?" The voice was weak, but it recognized me. I eased the door open and saw Ray Collins fully thinner than I remembered. Shoulders slumped, a worn blanket draped over him like a coat. The room was small, with a noisy little heater losing the fight against the cold. Medicine bottles crowded a plastic table, a glass of yellowish water beside them, and a bed that looked like it would squeak if you even breathed on it. When Ray saw Mr. Wexler behind me, he didn't yell, didn't make a scene. He just froze, and his face shut down like someone had flipped off a switch. Mr. Wexler stepped in like he was entering Forbidden's territory. His eyes swept the room, bed, bottles, blanket, then settled on Ray, as if his brain was trying to plug this image into some spreadsheet. "Ray," he said, the name coming out hard. Ray didn't answer right away. He stared at the floor and managed a "sir" so low it sounded like an apology for existing. I watched Wexler's fingers open and close once at his side, without him realizing. Then he looked at me, demanding an explanation with his eyes, as if I We're still the one at fault for putting this in front of him. I took a breath and finally said what I'd never been able to say calmly because no one ever wanted to hear it. I ran into Ray by accident, I said, nodding toward the pills on the table. He's been trying to choose between paying for heat and buying medicine. I pulled the towels from my bag and laid them on a rickety chair. What I took from your house was stuff headed to the trash. I was just reusing it to take care of him. I showed him the cat, and Ray's face lit up for half a second, a tired little smile, like that animal was the only bright thing in his week. He never asked me for anything, I added, looking straight at Wexler. He just tried not to be a burden. Same way he did in your house. Ray swallowed and finally spoke, not raising his voice, but carrying a visible shame from how tight his neck was. I didn't want anyone to know. Especially him. He jerked his chin in Wexler's direction, unable to look up. I worked on that property for years. Kept the garden, fixed things that weren't even my job. And the day I got sick, I turned into a cost. Mr. Wexler stepped forward like he was about to argue, then stopped halfway. He pulled the old photo from his pocket, the smiling, younger version of himself with Ray, and looked at it like it belonged to a stranger. His mouth fell slightly open, and for once he didn't have a ready answer. Then I saw something I never expected. Mr. Wexler lowered his head a little, like the ceiling had dropped. He looked at the bad bed, the failing heater, Ray shivering from cold and illness, then looked at me with a kind of exhaustion that felt real. I didn't know it was like this, he said, the words coming out crooked as if he wasn't used to saying I and didn't to know in the same sentence. Ray let out a dry, tiny laugh and replied, "You didn't want to know." The silence that followed wasn't comfortable. It was the kind that changes the direction of a night. Right there in that cramped room, I realized the storm outside was nothing compared to what was about to happen. Because Mr. Wexler took another step, looked Ray in the eye, and said, almost in a whisper, "Pack a bag. We're leaving here right now." And in the way he said we, I could feel it. This was either about to be his first truly human act, or the biggest mistake of his life. I walked down the stairs behind them, the cat still inside my coat, feeling like I was escorting two worlds that were never meant to collide. Mr. Wexler led the way now, his steps steady, but his face had changed. Less owner, more lost. Ray followed slowly, clutching a grocery bag with 2 changes of clothes, like he still expected someone to tap his shoulder and say, "Turn around. This isn't for you." When we reached the parking lot, the wind cut through us and Ray shivered hard, and I saw Wexler glance sideways at him, like that fragility was a language he'd never spoken. In the car, the silence wasn't the same as before. It wasn't the tight silence of accusation. It was a kind of shame neither of them wanted to name. I drove back towards Scarsdale, watching Wexler's fingers drum once against the door before going still. He stared out the window like the city had changed shape, like he was seeing the people outside for the first time. Ray tried to make small talk, polite, almost apologizing for breathing. "The garden must be a mess by now," he murmured. Wexler didn't answer right away. When he did, it was just, "We'll deal with it later." And the way he said later carried a new weight, like, for the first time. Later meant continuity, not disposal. When the mansion came into view at the end of the street, bright and perfect, the contrast hit like a slap. That house was another planet. And Ray looked like someone who'd been exiled and was coming back without a passport. Wexler unlocked the gate, opened the front door, and stood in the foyer for a moment, staring at the marble floor like he could see stains nobody else could. "You're staying in the guest room," he told Ray, but his tone wasn't a command, it was a decision trying to become care. I headed to the kitchen to make hot water and heard the housekeeper open her mouth to complain in the hallway. Wexler cut her off before she could finish. "No," he said sharply. No comments. I barely recognized that kind of authority used to protect someone. I helped Ray sit on the smaller living room sofa, away from the draft, and draped a blanket over his shoulders. He held onto it with both hands like it was something too precious to be real. Wexler stood on the other side of the room, not sure what to do with his body. He looked at me and asked quietly, "How long?" I answered, "Months. Almost half a year." He closed his eyes for a moment and exhaled slowly, like he was counting a loss, but this time the loss was his own pride. If you've ever watched a rich man realize way too late that he wrecked a life out of convenience, hit subscribe, because this was the point where he finally understood the size of the damage. Later that same night, he grabbed the phone and started calling. Not lawyers, not advisors. Clinics, private doctors, non-emergency ambulance services. I heard him tell someone on the other end, "I'll pay for everything. I just need him seen now." The way he said now held no arrogance, just real urgency. When he hung up, he stared at Ray, who'd already nodded off, sitting up, and said to me, barely audible, "I thought I was being practical. I was just being a coward." I leaned against the counter and stayed quiet, because any speech from me would be turned into a moral lesson, and he didn't need a sermon, he needed to face himself. When the low wail of the ambulance siren finally echoed down the street, blue and red lights washing over the white walls of the mansion, the absurdity of the whole scene hit me. The most powerful man in that house suddenly looked like the smallest person there. He held the door for the paramedics, helped lift Ray carefully, and in the middle of all that movement, he looked at me with an expression I'd never seen on his face before, eyes asking for guidance. And I knew what came next wasn't just paying for treatment. It was deciding, for the first time, whether he'd keep buying silence or learn how to live with real people inside that house. I stood in the hallway while the paramedics settled Ray onto the stretcher, and Wexler didn't move from his side, holding the door like it was the only thing he knew how to do right. He didn't bark orders, didn't try to solve it with money by talking over everyone. He just asked the doctor's name twice, wrote it on a crumpled scrap of paper, and repeated, "I'm going with him." When Ray tried to say he didn't have to, Wexler cut him off with a simple, "Stop," not harsh, just a man who'd finally realized how far the abandonment had gone. On the way to the hospital, he was on the phone again, but not like usual. No speeches, no "do you know who I am?" Just numbers and approvals fast, like every second was another growing debt. I watched him hand over his card without checking the amount, and for the first time, it didn't look like showing off. It looked like repair work. When the intake nurse asked what his relationship was to the patient, Wexler hesitated at the counter like he was searching for a word he'd never used. I'm responsible," he finally said. And that word hit me hard because he could have said former employer or contact or even no relation. But he chose responsible. The night turned into a blur of white hallways, bad coffee, and low TV noise in the waiting room. The cat stayed quiet in my lap, just watching, while Wexler stayed on his feet most of the time, like sitting would make him weak. At some point, he pulled me aside and asked, in the lowest voice I'd ever heard from him, "How much have you spent helping him?" I answered, "It doesn't matter." He pushed, and I tossed out a rough number. He pulled out his phone, made a transfer right there, and said, "That's so you stop putting yourself at risk over garbage." I almost snapped back, but stopped. For the first time, it didn't sound like he was trying to buy me. It sounded like a clumsy way of asking me to take care of myself. When Ray was finally moved to a room, Wexler asked me to ride back to the mansion with him. The storm had calmed, but the air was still heavy and wet, and the house looked different, not because it had changed, but because we had. As soon as we walked in, he headed straight for the kitchen, opened the fridge, stared at the neatly wrapped leftovers, and stood there like they were evidence against him. The housekeeper hovered in the doorway, ready to complain, and he raised his hand without looking at her. "From today on, nothing gets thrown out without going through me," he said. Then he looked directly at me and added, "And no one in this house gets treated like they're disposable." Before sunrise, he opened the door to the formal dining room, the one that almost never got used, and ordered real breakfast with real food for everyone in the house. It wasn't some pretty speech. It was awkward, clumsy, and that's exactly why it felt honest. He grabbed his own coat, went out without security, and walked all the way down to the guardhouse to leave instructions for the driver. When Ray's discharged, he's not going back to 3B, find him a decent place. On his way back in, he stopped in front of an old family portrait, one of those stiff pictures that looks more like a contract than a memory, and took it off the wall, like he was finally making room. That's when it hit me. He hadn't turned into a saint overnight, but he'd stopped using luxury as a wall, and started trying to use it as a bridge. I want to lie to you. I still remember the way he looked at me in that kitchen, like he'd already planned my public humiliation. And I still remember the same man hours later, holding the hospital door, not knowing what to say, just trying to do the right thing in the rawest way he could. Ray got treatment, a decent place to recover, and the cat became an official resident of the house, not because of some announcement, but because nobody had the nerve to kick out someone who only wanted to survive. Today, I don't tell this story because I think rich people are all villains and poor people are all saints. I tell it because I watched a man who had everything realize he was empty, and I watched someone who had almost nothing refuse to be an accomplice to waste. Mr. Wexler is still difficult, still proud, still tries to control everything. But now, when someone walks into that house, they don't just feel cleanliness and silence. They feel presence, they feel people, and the craziest part? If I hadn't carried that bag out of the house that night, Ray might not have survived the week. So, yes, I'd do it all over again. And you Would you have forgiven him? If this story kept you here, hit like.